basically, as I understand it, the issue is that 7.1B2 and 7.1B3 provide for different processes for non-conforming structures. And some of them in single family residential zones go to the Zoning Board of Appeals, while the rest of them, anything that B residential district, apartment zone, multifamily zone, commercial or business zone, comes to Planning and Zoning Commission. And we have an example of this tonight on the agenda for the regular meeting, which both had to go receive a variance from the ZBA and now has to come to Planning and Zoning to receive a special permit. So Lynn and I were talking about this. Seems like an easy place to make a quick fix to kind of prevent this, but Lynn, do you want to explain it anymore? Is there more to it?
Sure. So basically, sorry, I'm like trying to watch the meeting also, but basically the way it was divided, and I'm not sure about the history, but the way it was divided is that everything that's single family residential would come to, would go straight to the zoning board, but in the B residence zone, it's 2 families allowed, single families allowed, and single family accessory uses are allowed. And that forces you to go to the B resident, forces you to go to ZBA if you have a dimensional variance, and then to come to P&Z for an additional special permit. So the thought was, because this is the second application recently that we've had this problem with, and in dealing with our town attorney, they've highlighted that this could potentially be an issue, was to think about, and there is no exact way yet, but to think about how to split out either the B residence zone and send it to the zoning board straight away, or to think about a different way to divide the non-conforming structures. Do all residential go to the zoning board? Do commercial come to the P&Z? So that's, I mean, I'm in the middle of doing some research actually of what other towns do and what other communities do, but just to open it up for discussion, if anyone had any particular thoughts about which way they prefer, or if there is any preference there.
It seems a little strange to me to split it by residential, commercial. I don't know whether that, because it, I mean, the theory, however we decide, it doesn't seem like it should be along those lines, but maybe I'm wrong.
You mean not along
today? Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. There's like a delay, I think. So when one person speaks, the other jumps in. So speak, Kirsten, I'm sorry.
After we talked today, I was wondering if, I mean, the way that we've done this, obviously, I think is a little weird, but in other towns, do they not all just go to the same board? Like, why have any division? Why not choose planning, zoning, or ZBA as opposed to trying to do a split?
They do traditionally go to the ZBA, but you could, I mean, you could send them all to P&Z for expansions if you wanted to, or you could send them all to ZBA. There's a couple of issues with this chapter. This just happens to be one, and this one's pronounced that we've seen. Tonight will be the second example we've seen very. I'm sorry, John, you had a comment. I don't know if Krista could see you.
Everyone hear me all right? I haven't tested the audio.
Yep.
You can hear me? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Having actually been on ZBA at one point, one of the things that the ZBA folks want to avoid is zoning rules that create odd anomalies or potential anomalies that would end up falling into their bailiwick that they have to sort out. So they prefer is that the zoning rules broadly are clear enough so that it's only something that is a truly odd lot that would fall into their purview. So that's one thing to think about. The second is regarding the differentiation between, call it housing of some sort and commercial, is that, for example, commercial is now falling within P and Z as opposed to ZBA. But let's think for a second about that small office building that's on Cherry Street that we focused on, where they wanted to turn it into a condo, and it fell under us. I could see them having made the argument that we're in this really odd lot and it creates certain anomalies, and we should be able to shift this over from office to residential. And so I think one of the issues is, do we as a commission want to create rules that could allow oddly shaped lots that are commercial to become something entirely different, which may be possible under a ZBA rule. So some things to think about.
Yes, and ZBA, it's a variance, and you're asking for a hardship to tag on to what you were saying, whereas a special permit, it's also it's a different request, and it's a different metric that you're using to determine whether or not they can get the approval.
I understand, but I remember on CBA, a lot of the issues were that, you know, I have a lot that's shaped like a zigzag, and it's it's only 3/4 of an acre as opposed to 2 acres in the 2 acre zone, and half of it is, you know, ledge or wetlands, and I need to put something here because there's no other place to put it. Often it's something like that. And so there are any number of commercial lots in town, for example, that are a bit odd lots too, such as this one on Cherry Street. And so, you know, is this something we want to have falling within a sort of a ZBA type of decision or a planning and zoning decision? So that's something for us to perhaps consider.
I think we get our fair share of controversial issues, so I'm in favor of allowing ZBA to handle as many issues as possible. Unless John likes to have more controversial issues. Did you hear that, John?
You're on mute.
Yeah,
John Goodwin, you're on mute.
I just,
You can't hear you either.
Now you can. The host muted me. I didn't mute myself.
Sorry.
No, I don't want any more either. I would ask maybe Jean this question, because some of the history here is when I joined the commission was when we were finalizing you know, the latest round of regulations, and I think I remember that there was a lot of discussion as to with this new round of regulations, which was back in 04, 05, you know, what should go ZBA's way and what should go P&Z's way. And Jean, I came in at the tail end, but do you have any thoughts?
I do remember there was a lot of controversy about it, and I think both groups were trying to get rid of it, frankly. You know, so I don't really think anybody was dying to have the authority to deal with it, if I remember correctly. And I think maybe I do that. But other than that, I mean, it was one of those conversations that kind of went on, and finally, that's how it got to look like it is.
oh, sorry, Krista. There you go, sorry.
So it doesn't seem like anyone has a strong feeling that this definitely needs to stay with planning and zoning. I mean, I'm not saying it should go to ZBA, but like, does anyone feel very strongly that planning and zoning should retain ownership of non-conforming structures in the commercial zones, be residence zones, apartment zones, or multifamily zones?
I think the only difficult part becomes the hardship part versus the special permit. And I think that's where we have to try and figure it out.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, John.
Chris.
Yeah, as far as the special permit type of decisions, I think that should remain with P&Z. If it's a true hardship, and the hardship goes with the land, and the hardship is really, some type of odd lot, physically odd lot. Size, non-conforming, it's skinny, it's shaped like a bowling alley, it's half ledge and half wetland or something like that, which falls under ZBA, where it's very much of a bespoke issue to that particular lot. That should remain with ZBA, but the other matters I think should stay with planning and zoning, though I would like it to fall in one or the other, as opposed to you got to go to two places to get something approved, which seems like an undue hassle.
Krista Kent wants to speak.
Okay.
I would agree with John. I think that, our commission, we've got unique talents that have done a very good job in the past of reviewing applications. And I think it's important that we keep that ability to weigh in on making important decisions. I'm not sure ZBA has that point of view and understanding of the issues that P&Z has.
I think, again, that planning and zoning is charged with having a holistic view of the town. And so those types of matters should properly remain within planning and zoning's purview. ZBA is more, there's a bespoke, site-specific, odd situation that needs some judgment, and leave that to them.
Oh, Jean, I'm sorry. You're.
Okay.
Sorry.
Saying, should we establish a hardship then? In other words, do we look at it first, and if we determine there's a hardship, it goes to ZBA? John, what do you think?
Hardship is a bit of a squishy topic and definition. And that falls, it's more of a bespoke judgment issue. I'm sure the lawyers can go into exactly how this has been adjudicated in the past, but my own experience, having been on it, is that it has to do with highly uneven terrain, odd-sized lots, water features, ledge, odd abutting neighbors, and so forth. And those types of very site-specific issues having to do with topography in the land and how the land is made up, as opposed to other topics, which I think should remain under planning and zoning's purview.
But we don't want to add an extra step, the establishment of the hardship by P&Z and then going somewhere else again. I almost wonder if we have to go through that. As much as I would love to hand this off to ZBA, maybe we should just keep the whole thing.
Well, I think an applicant, my understanding is, can always claim a hardship.
Right.
Now, the ZBA is going to determine whether there is a hardship, and if there isn't one, you don't get what you ask for. And so if you're a conforming flat lot and you say, well, I just want a house that's twice as big and I want to invade the setbacks, ZBA, I have to believe, is going to say no. If you say I have a 1/10 of an acre lot and half of it's ledge, and the only place you can put a house here is here, that's a ZBA type of decision.
Yeah, just once again, a reminder that we're talking about structure. I mean, right now, the only section we're talking about is non-conforming structures, not non-conforming lots. But I feel like we've kind of gone full circle on this, and I hear what Jean's saying. If they're going to have to come to us for a special permit anyway, maybe it does make sense that we just handle all non-conforming structures as opposed to sending some to ZBA and then back to us for a special permit.
I would still suggest that structures is much more of a P and Z issue.
Yeah.
If you have an odd lot and you need to put the structure here as opposed to there, it's sort of a ZBA issue, given topography. But, saying I'm going to put, halfway house here as opposed to single family dwelling, that should probably be a planning and zoning issue as opposed to a ZBA issue, in my opinion.
Right. So under section 7.1A, non-conforming uses always come before planning and zoning, but for special permit, any changes to them. So yeah, so I agree with you. It's already set up like that. Lynn, do you feel like that's enough feedback, or do you want to keep this conversation going, or you want to move on?
No, we can move on. That's enough feedback to start. And then when I get more research, we can take it from there.
Okay. So the next item on our agenda was to talk about senior housing. And I should have said this at the beginning. I mean, it's been a while since we've had a meeting. I think our last meeting was in October. And at that point in time, we were thinking that we would go through the zoning ordinance chapter by chapter, review it. And that's not off the table, but I think in the last 6 months, some issues have come up that seemed more important, and I didn't want to lose them in the effort to do a chronological review of the zoning ordinance. So that's why we're skipping around a little bit right now. And obviously one of the issues that's come up in the last 6 months is senior housing. And so, what I took away from the proposal by Waveney for the Owen Oak Ridge senior housing project, and I want to make sure that we're all on the same page here, but what I heard was that we all are supportive of senior housing in a near town, just like our POCD talks about, and that we were even in favor of that particular site potentially being used for senior housing. I feel like the disconnect that some of us may have had with that project was the scale, density, or massing of the project. Am I off base there, or we generally kind of agree to those statements, just as a starting point?
I think that's pretty accurate.
Okay.
I think it's pretty accurate, but I think there are those of us who would just as soon see it somewhere else too. So if we were picking a site, that might not be our first choice. I'll put it that way.
Okay, fair point. So what Lynn and I wanted to start tonight was a conversation about is, what do we see senior housing in New Canaan look like? And I'm happy to kick off with some of my ideas. I'm also equally happy to just open the floor if some of you have strong ideas, and I'll chime in later with mine. But does anyone have a preference?
Go ahead.
All right. So I guess what challenged me when we were considering the Owen Oak proposal was that it felt like that, at least in my opinion, was like a big box model of senior housing. And frankly, I haven't spent a lot of time in my life looking at senior housing, but I hadn't really seen any other options. And so it kind of felt like, is that the only way to do senior housing? And I struggled with that, because if that's the only way, then who am I to suggest we should do it some other way? But I have taken some time since then to look at other options, and there are a variety of options for senior housing. I mean, ranging from just aging in place in your home, which is always an option, to providing large scale senior housing buildings with all the amenities like we saw with the Owen Oak Ridge proposal. But I think, in my opinion, what fits better with the character of New Canaan is something on a smaller scale. And what I came across over the weekend in terms of things that look like that, on the APA's website, American Planning Association, there's a lot of talk about something they're calling pocket neighborhoods for seniors, which are basically more cottage style, smaller homes on smaller sites that kind of look like infill. It's not going to have the same level of amenities as a larger building, but it does provide the same level of, some level of community for seniors to be near one another, to have shared services that they participate in. And, you know, I'm not saying that's the only option, but that one really hit me as like something that I could see happening in our town and working in our town. And then the other thing I thought a little bit about is, you know, COVID-19 is changing the world in a lot of ways, and I don't know in what way it's going to change senior housing. Again, I don't pretend to be an expert on that, but I feel like any option where we're integrating seniors into our community as opposed to isolating them either, you know, further away from us or in large buildings where we don't have interaction or contact with them, it just seems logical and it seems safer, and it seems like that could potentially be the future. Maybe people aren't going to want to go to these larger facilities and would like the option to stay closer in the community, be more integrated with all the generations that live here. So anyway, those were my thoughts, is to start looking at some smaller scale options for senior housing. But like I said, I have no idea where anyone else's head is on this.
I think the small cottage kind of thing it has some interest, and it's certainly something that we should discuss, especially given our current situation here. I think people are going to be less excited about being in a large facility going forward. And I think it's going to take a long time to get over it for people.
Jean, I would agree with you. There is a great deal of interest in the, you know, the smaller cottage, you know, lower density type housing. The issue is the economics. You know, to locate a facility in the downtown area, the land is very expensive, and to make the numbers work means more units. It's what we're, you know, what we just went through with Waveney. You know, I think there's going to be a difficult contradiction, or, you know, it's going to be very difficult to find inexpensive land to develop those cottage type units in the downtown area. Now maybe out in the country, or, you know, further out from town, there is the possibility.
No, I think you're right. I think it would be really cost ineffective downtown. There's no question about that.
John, Chris?
Yeah, one of a preponderant reason why Waveney wanted to build where they wanted to build is, one, it was adjacent to a facility they already had, so we have some shared services and costs. And also, you know, they owned part of the property that was just sitting there fallow, and they had a motivated seller for the other part of the property. So their cost basis for the land going in was going to be very, very low. And it made the numbers work. So I agree with Kent that you have to make the numbers work on these, and because there tends to be a fairly large fixed cost with this, particularly for the amenitization. You need a certain number of rooms in order to make it pencil out. The spread out version that Jean and others have mentioned, you know, I've seen this. I grew up next to a large CCRC that was about 4 city blocks. It was run by the Presbyterian Church, and they had those low rise. They were essentially one bedroom cottages, and they're all one level, and, you know, someone took care of the gardening and all that and so on, and that was really independent living. So when we say senior housing, I think it's important to differentiate what exactly you mean by senior housing. And we already have a skilled nursing facility in town, so I'm assuming we're not going to get another one. And it really comes down to either independent living or assisted living. And what was suggested by Waveney was really an independent living, a highly amenitized independent living, where people will probably have their own car and be driving around. Assisted living, those folks tend not to have a car, and often they're using a Jack and Jill bathroom with a neighbor. And so it's a different level. And those tend to have much different economics and footprint needs. And so I think we have to be clearer on whether it's going to be an assisted living or it's going to be a independent living, or perhaps a 50-50 situation. What we have now with the current facility is really an independent living facility. And, you know, they're asking for another one.
You think Waveney on Farm Road's independent living? I mean, I haven't been there. I just thought that was there was more nursing care provided than.
Well, there's always some, but, you know, the skilled nursing facilities I've toured, and I have one next to my office when I had an office, you know, it tends to be people who are really quite old and not particularly ambulatory. A number are in wheelchairs, at least for part of the day. They may be able to transfer themselves to their bed on their own, but that may be it. They also tend to have memory care units for people who may be have dementia, but are still ambulatory. It's a different type of business model than an independent, than a true independent living, or even a highly amenitized independent living.
I mean, I guess in my mind, I was thinking that independent living is what was being proposed and what we need. I don't know if we also need, I mean, I kind of feel like we need the full spectrum, a little bit of everything in this town so that people have, you know, a place to start and a place to end as their life continues on. So, I mean, didn't start this conversation particularly thinking about one type of senior living. I was thinking about, you know, how do we provide the whole spectrum? But let's just change gears for a minute. I mean, how do we feel about, I mean, in my mind, it kind of depends on what type, like the size of the buildings we're talking about, but are we still on the same page with the POCD that we want to see this stuff close to downtown? Because that then dictates kind of the size of lots we're dealing with, which then kind of dictates the size of development we can have.
Ideally, yes.
I think John wanted to speak, Lynn. He's waiting.
Oh, sorry. Once you mute yourself, you can't unmute yourself. I have to unmute you, sorry.
Okay. Maybe I came in a little late, Krista, after your next question, but the way I was thinking about this is different types of senior living have different levels of service. And the challenge we ended up having was they wanted to put in what struck me as a full service establishment on a small property downtown. And as I think about it, and this maybe goes more to your cottage concept, Krista, is I wonder if we think about different types of senior living, and I think this is probably where you're going, but if we think of different types of senior living and then think about where those different types, if we can agree, maybe it's one type, maybe it's two types, maybe it's three types, whatever it is, then the next step could be, then we could say, okay, this area of town would be, suitable for a certain level. So for example, the way I thought of that site was I could have seen that site having a lower level of development, higher price point, because you're not getting the economies of scale, but also less service. So, and I don't know exactly how to define that. And then the way I thought, ultimately what Waveney wanted to do, it seemed to me that should be something that should be someplace in a more open area of town. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if we sort of think about, what are, different types of senior housing, and if we agreed that, where would we allow them, so to speak, or so that was my thought there.
Hey, Lynn?
Krista, Dick wants to speak?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Ward.
I think one of the realities of New Canaan, and it's something that we're not going to probably ever have much effect on, is there is a fairly large, more than not in my backyard. We get that. But there is also a fairly large stream of people that want no change. They don't really care what it is that may develop. They just don't want to change. So there's always going to be, I feel, a certain resistance to anything that seems to sort of be new. And if it has size, well, that makes it easy to object to, because then you latch on to its size or its location. I mean, it was a small lot, granted, that Waveney was using or hoped to use. However, it was surrounded for the most part by institutions or a highway. So the emphasis on small lot was sort of used to cover perhaps a different reason that a lot of people have. So, you know, it's hard to see. I guess somehow, I don't know, somehow you have to sell to the town that senior housing really is important. Everybody says it is, but I'm not sure that a lot of people really care, unless they're seniors, and just sort of don't want to make a change. So there's sort of that underlying issue that we're always going to face.
Yeah, I agree that that issue is always there. I guess, so, but you didn't have an issue then with the size of that building in that location? Just to kind of understand, I mean, because senior housing is important enough that that would have worked for you.
I would have voted in favor of it.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to feel everyone out. Kent, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think that the project had a very good chance of passing had they reduced the density and some of the amenity spaces so that it wasn't so large. And, you know, I don't know if that's half of what they were proposing, but had it been a smaller development, it still could have, you know, had mass to it in multiple units. I think it might have passed. It was just too big for that site.
Okay. Other people? Claire? Claire's on mute, Lynn.
Carol, let me mute you. I'm sorry. There you go.
I just have two comments. I think one, we also really need to focus on affordable senior housing and maybe some rentals for seniors, because a lot of these developments are very expensive, and a lot of seniors really don't have the funds to, you know, take advantage of that if they want to stay in New Canaan. So I would really stress looking at senior rentals, more affordable options for seniors. And another comment is, if we move the senior housing outside of the downtown area, I think all of a sudden, if we put in a residential area, now it's an institution. And now we've got another problem with, you know, institutions in a residential neighborhood, institutional creep, you know, getting more, you know, traffic, et cetera, et cetera. I think we really need to kind of focus it within the downtown if it's going to be a formal, like a formal entity where that would offer, you know, assistance with medical and stuff like that.
Okay. What about the scale issue, Claire? Like,
I thought the scale was way too big. The Waveney one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was way too big. I don't think people could have gotten into that garage. I think they could have, I don't know, they probably could have found a way, but apparently it didn't work for their economy of scale, but I think that probably could have been adjusted. I don't know that you needed all those amenities on site when you live in New Canaan, and if you can walk to restaurants in town, and, you know, if you're in the middle of downtown, you don't really need them on site.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think that's kind of what John Goodwin was saying earlier, that, you know, if you're going to be in town, you can reduce the size because you don't need all those amenities, versus if you are going further out of town, then you do need those amenities. But you're right, I think you're going to bump up on the same issues we see with institutional uses in larger lot zones.
Excuse me, I think one of the issues too, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think one of the issues is it's not as horrible as everybody thinks it was. I mean, I lived on Garish Lane for 9 years, and believe me, each year the hill got a little steeper walking back up. And at 90, I can't believe there's anybody except Laszlo that's going to walk up that hill. And we know he can do it, But and even realistically, they're not any 80-year-olds who walk up that hill on a regular basis. So they're going to need transportation into town. Granted, it's very quick. It's just a little, quick ride for them, and it isn't the same as being out of town. But I think we made too much over the fact that you can walk to everything, because it's not that simple.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Krista, can you hear me?
Yes.
Following up on Claire's point on affordable housing, and I should know this because we've talked about it off and on in the past, but is a concept to consider in the code any motivations to provide affordable senior housing?
Yeah, Lynn and I talked about that earlier today. I was talking about specifically senior housing. If, say, we have multifamily projects come through, you could require, a small percentage to be available for age-restricted universal design development. But I think the affordability piece is an important one because these developments are all pretty expensive to get into. And if in my ideas, which are still forming, if senior housing was sort of spread throughout the downtown area in little clusters of development, then the transportation links do become very important. There'd have to be some way to connect people. Obviously walking is an option, maybe, but like you'd need van service or something to like get people around, which I don't know how that works. Yes, John Chris?
Yeah, if the type of housing is assisted living, that van becomes challenging because in assisted living, you don't cook for yourself, you eat in the central cafeteria. And let's say you have a cluster of 8 units, you can't have your own kitchen to do it. It just doesn't work. And also with those types of properties, the parking lot is not for the residents, the parking lot is for the staff, since there's a much higher staff to occupant ratio because the people there need more physical assistance, and then you will have an independent living. The number of staff you have in independent living is whatever you have naturally for a large apartment building. And then you throw in the amenities. All the amenities need to be managed and cared for, and you need the pool cleaner, you need the person in the gym and so forth. And again, that ramps up the staff ratio. So it's a function of just a core number of people to run an apartment building. And then it ups from there if you have high amenities.
Okay. Lynn, I feel like I have enough from this conversation right now to kind of start to conceptualize some ideas or options that we could bring back to the subcommittee at subsequent meetings. Do you feel the same?
Yes, agreed. I mean, are there any last minute thoughts anyone has? But I think we do have a lot to start with.
Okay. Moving on, the last thing on the agenda tonight, and again, this is all just kind of to feel you guys out in terms of where we want to head with this stuff so that Lynn and I have some direction, but we've had some issues recently in the last couple of months with the B residential zone and the apartment zone. You guys may recall the application that I think was withdrawn on Richmond Hill. I don't remember exactly when that was, but it was sometime in the last 6 months. They wanted to do basically 4 single family homes on 2 lots and make some changes to, I believe, the apartment zone to make that possible. And, as I think you're all aware, the B residential zone also allows, as it's currently written, for two detached single family homes on the same lot, which is, Lynn and I talked earlier today, sort of an odd thing. It's not something you see very often in zoning ordinances. I don't know that it's good or bad, but it's certainly unique. So I guess the first thing I wanted to get some feedback on is, I'm assuming that this allowing more than one single family structure in the B residence zone is something that's just been carried over for a while. I have no idea how long, but how do we feel about that? How do we feel about allowing 2 single family a detached as opposed to a 2-family home that's attached to itself, each other? Is this something we like? Is this something we want to continue? Is this just like a weird thing that happened and we don't remember why and we don't care?
I think a lot of it was the weird thing, frankly.
So if somebody came in on a B residential zone lot and wanted to build 2 single-family structures, I mean, obviously right now we have to allow them if they could meet the regulations, but is that something we want to continue to see in town?
It seems to me from running, excuse me, running around town, I think generally speaking, the attached look better than the non-attached.
The attached look better.
Yeah.
We just approved something on Richmond Hill. We approved 2, they were detached homes on a single lot. And then also behind St. Aloysius, we approved 4 homes on a single lot.
Mhm.
And then also at the end of Richmond Hill, there was 2 houses. Like we've seen this quite a bit in the past, and we tend to approve it.
Yes, John?
Yeah, we have. I'm sort of vibing with our chairman that the more I look at it, the less enamored I tend to be of it. They look very crowded. You know, if you look at the on Maple, right next to an applicant here, and I think we approved it. It's really a 2-family house that's one single building. It's right next to where the cleaners is now. So it's next to a commercial area, right by. It's right next to the applicant from on Maple. I don't think it looks bad. I think it looks good, and there are others like that. So if it's a 2-family, I think those well-designed ones that are really one building but split really look much better. You have one of these on Richmond Hill. I think it looks good. The ones that are separate just look kind of crowded together the more I look at them, and I'm just less enamored of them again the longer I look at them.
Okay. So it sounds like maybe these separate single-family homes on one lot in the B residential zone is not something we want to continue to encourage or allow.
I think Ken has a question.
All right, Grant.
Yeah, I agree. The single family or multiple family one building is really a better use of the property as far as ecology. You use less material with one building as opposed to 2 separate buildings, and you have more open space. So I think just on a planning basis, it makes a lot of sense. And I think it kind of, at the end of the day, gets down to the size of the lot. If the lot is a little bigger, you know, yeah, you could do 2 separate structures. I don't know if we can prevent it, but I definitely think we should encourage more of a single structure, utilizing the site and materials in a better way.
All right. So then the next topic was the apartment zone. That's kind of where I just wanted to feel you guys out on that with the B residence zone. The apartment zone allows what's allowed in the B residence zone, and then obviously multifamily units as well, three or more units in one building. Lynn and I talked a little bit about the apartment zone and the multifamily zone, and I guess my first, I mean, I don't have a lot of clarity on this, but just reading both of those districts, yes, there's some different standards, but I'm not really clear myself on how or why they're different. I mean, the purpose statement for both of those districts is the same for apartment and multifamily. Anyway, so if you guys have, maybe someone can give me the historical background about why we have 2 different districts and what they're each intended to be, because it doesn't shine clear for me just reading the zoning ordinance.
One idea is, I was waiting for Jean to say something. She's not talking. No, seriously, one idea is Krista, you could talk to Glenn Chowder.
Okay.
because he may be able to give you some insights. Since Gene, he was the driver behind the 05 regs, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's probably a really good idea.
Is the 05 regs when the multifamily district came about? Like, did we just have apartment up until then?
I don't know, Gene.
No, I don't think so. But I think if you're talking B zone.
I was just talking the difference between the multifamily zone and the apartment zone and
Okay.
trying to figure out, I mean, there's, slightly different density requirements. I can see in the apartment zone that each dwelling unit's supposed to have access to, the outside, basically no interior hallways in the apartment zone, whereas the multifamily zone allows that. I'm just trying to figure out before you can even start to look at the zoning map and say, are these the right places? It's kind of like, well, what were we even trying to do? And once you kind of know that, then you can start to say, did we do it in the right place? John, Chris?
Yeah, I remember when we spoke of this a while ago, and I think Gene brought it up, that if you look at the map, there's not a lot of contiguousness among these zones. And if you look at how things have developed over the years, they've moved in a direction. And my own sense is that it'd be useful to take a clean sheet of paper and think about, given what exists now, what type of, let's call it multi-housing zone, to use a generic term, would be appropriate, given where things are as far as type of residential and type of commercial. I think just the world has moved on from where we were 15 years ago, and taking a fresh look would be a useful exercise.
Okay. Other thoughts on the B residential zone, apartment zone, or multifamily zone, and how we want to use these tools we have differently or keep them the same?
I think it's something we want to work on now rather than later, because we have situations like we had on Seminary where there was nothing else, no reason for that to be split up the way it was. It's kind of crazy.
Okay. Well, Lynn and I can certainly take a look at that. We have about 5 minutes before the next meeting starts, so we can either keep chatting about that or just hang out, I guess.
Well, Krista, we also have minutes from the last two meetings from September 24th of 2019 and October 29th of 2019 that we could approve.
Okay. Let me pull those in. Do we have to vote on that, Lynn, or we just?
Yeah, if someone would have to make a motion.
Okay.
And then,
Well, I'm happy to make a motion to approve if you can confirm that I attended both of them.
I have the same problem.
Yeah, it was a while ago. All right, Mr. Ward, it does not look like you're on the September 24th members present list.
What was the second day, Krista?
October 29th.
Okay, then I would move approval of the minutes.
Yes, you're on both, Jean. And am
Second.
I allowed to second? Oh, Claire can second it. So Lynn, do we want to, we can talk about this in the regular meeting, but I'm assuming we'll plan on doing a follow-up for the June meeting, doing the subcommittee again at 6.
yeah, and everyone's amenable to it. We can set it up to be the subcommittee meeting at 6, and Krista and I could do some research and come back with some thoughts on the topics.
Okay. We'll plan on that then.
Okay, guys, we'll get going. We'll try to get going right at 7. Lynn, are you aware of any non-attendees tonight?
No, I don't see Mr. Radman on there, and I see Karen, our secretary, joined.
Okay.
And I'm watching as somebody come on. Karen, can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna mute you. I just want to check.
Yep.
No, it was Dennis, no, it was actually, I think Dennis was junior, Damien Dodson, you know, first for Bam out of bio, and I think, Justin Richardson. Josh Richardson. And it was Kevin Knox and the first, which was the one I got Buddy Hield for. And Zion was won most improved player out of 28 and 13. And Kawhi won defensive player of the year, averaging 38 and 6. Should want to repeat. Damien